Thank you very much for the introduction, Jen, and welcome everyone to this afternoon session. I'm going to start sharing my screen. I just wanted to mention that in the notes document that Jen just mentioned, and that she's going to put into the chat again for anyone who missed it, you will also find a link to the slide deck that I'll be talking through to in the first part of this session. And you also will find links to the tool that we are going to have a look at, as well as a short feedback form that you could use after this session if you wanted to. Any feedback is welcome, as the tool that I'm going to present is still kind of under development. So we just finished our kind of alpha to beta phase in development, but are still kind of looking into further improvements, so to say. So one thing just to start with is that I think I need to slightly correct the title, because what we are doing is not necessarily topic modeling, but topic detection, which is slightly different in terms of the method. So just to manage expectations in terms of what we're talking about today. In terms of the agenda, I'm going to start with a brief introduction to Archives Portal Europe, as I wasn't quite sure if everyone knows about it and knows what is behind it. I'm going to talk a little bit about topic-based searches as we currently can do them in the portal, and what is behind that in terms of the data preparation. Then I'm going to introduce the tool, and after that we will have about half an hour for you to test the tool yourselves and to just play around with it a little bit. And as Jen mentioned, after that, we're going to have a Q&A session where you can ask questions to the tool, questions to the Archives Portal Europe, questions to anything that is mentioned during this presentation. And also feel free to just pop questions into the chat while I'm going along. I'm happy to pause the presentation if there are any questions specific to something that I'm currently talking about, and Jan is going to keep an eye on the chat. Thanks for that. To start with, introduction to Archives Portal Europe. Archives Portal Europe started out in the mid-noughties. So there was a report on archives in the enlarged European Union in the context of the enlargement of the European Union towards the east that was happening in 2005.
Lots of different work in the email archiving area. So there's been great.
And part of that report was a recommendation that access to archives should be improved. And the idea was that a possible solution to that would be creating an internet gateway or portal that documents archives from and about Europe in one place, so it kind of brings them together. And we were lucky enough to get funding from the European Union for two projects, the APNet project, which ran between 2009 and 2012, and the APEX project between 2012 and 2015. And since then, the whole endeavor is run by a foundation which has its head office in the Netherlands, but we essentially kind of use it, working completely virtually. So we are a small team of 3. I've got one colleague in the UK, I myself am based in Germany, and then we've got one colleague who is based in Athens in Greece. So kind of across Europe distributed, and we also have a network of what we call country managers, which are kind of our first contacts into the countries participating in the portal. And with this, we kind of extend our main working group, so to say. Currently, we have 36 countries, including some overseas territories from, for example, France or the Netherlands, represented in the portal. That means we have content in more than 24 languages and 5 alphabets. So next to the Latin alphabet, we've got Georgian, Greek, the Cyrillic alphabet in various countries, and Hebrew. We have more than 7,100 institutions presented. Not all of them are providing content at the moment, In terms of content, we have around 1,100. And that means we have a collection of 600,000 collections, archival collections being described from the collection level to the item level. And if available and provided to us, we also link back to digital representations of the material. In terms of the types of institutions, we started out with mainly national archives in the APNet project, which in the second project, we extended to other types of archives. So we now have city archives, regional archives represented. We've got some private archives there, business archives from various types of organizations, archives of other cultural heritage institutions, so libraries or museums are also represented with their more archival collections. Or we've got church and university archives and any other type of archival institution that you can think of. We are not necessarily bound to these institutions being located in Europe. So as I mentioned, we already have some overseas territories represented, but we would also be taking in content from institutions that are outside of Europe, but where the content, the material itself, is about Europe and ties into European history. In terms of how everything is organized, as I mentioned, we are in the form of a foundation. So we have an assembly of associates. Those are the organizations giving us the money to further maintain and develop the portal. At the moment, this is mainly National Archives. So this is kind of still dragging on from the project days where National Archives were the beneficiaries of the project money. And they are now kind of giving back to the endeavor by supporting us further. Out of these organizations, a few colleagues have been appointed as the governing board. They are the ones essentially kind of strategically manning the day-to-day work. We've got the foundation staff, as I mentioned, we are a team of 3. And then the country managers network supporting us in the day-to-day work and in the connections with all the different institutions in their various countries. We also have connections to the international archives bodies, so to say. So we've got some connections to the European Board of National Archivists, to the European Archives Group, which is allocated with the European Commission, and to URBICA, specifically the European branch of the International Council on Archives. We also are connected to different other players in the cultural heritage sector. So in terms of information coming into Archives Portal Europe, we have strong ties to various regional and national portals in the countries that are connected to us. Which also helps us because that means that we don't have to kind of take care of each and every single institution and their potential archival management systems and export formats, but we essentially can pick up at the stage where these regional and national portals have already done a little bit of consolidation, so to say, in terms of how the data is then transferred to Archives Portal Europe. And in terms of kind of arrows going out of Archives Portal Europe, we are the domain aggregator towards Europeana, so the cross-domain cultural heritage portal for Europe. We have some ties with the Wikimedia Foundation, who have taken our presentation of institution information and included that into Wikidata. We have some ties to the colleagues in the US, for example, to the social networks and archival contexts platform SNAC. In terms of what the portal currently includes with regard to the different components that are working together. So we've got the portal kind of in the center, which, as I mentioned, holds currently content from a little bit more than 1,100 institutions. And we have on the left-hand side a set of tools that we have developed in order to help our partners with data preparation. The dashboard is the central tool, so essentially kind of every one of the institutions that is providing content has their own account. in the dashboard, and they are therefore in control with regard to what happens when to their materials. So they are essentially the ones deciding what they upload, when they upload, and how far they process it. So if they only kind of do publication in Archives Portal Europe, or if they are also using the possibility to, via Archives Portal Europe, publish their information in one of these other initiatives that we are connected with. And the data preparation tool is essentially a local version of that. So something that our partners can download, or essentially anyone can download, and can use for things like validation against specific XML schemas, conversion, and other things that are relevant in the data preparation. We also have an API via which users can access the data that ends up in Archives Portal Europe. At the moment, that is a very constrained view, although, because our partners have to actively say that they want to publish their data in the API, which also requires them to publish it under the Creative Commons CC0 license. So we are currently in the process of changing that a little bit. So hopefully in future, we will have definitely more of our content also provided in the API. And the portal also includes a section for registered users who have a little bit more possibilities than a general user would have on the portal, who can mainly kind of use the keyword search that is currently there, and registered users can, for example, save searches. So if they are doing some more in-depth research, they can get back to searches, they can see any new search results that have maybe kind of been added during the past 2 weeks with regard to their search. They can also bookmark certain content and get back to it, and they can start creating their own collections based on their research topics if they wanted to. Everything that we are developing is available in GitHub, and we are developing under the open source principle. So anyone who wanted to can, in theory, reuse our code in their contexts. In terms of what the portal presents content-wise, so we have the general information about the institutions. So that's contact information, that is information about opening hours, that might be information on a very general level of the material and holdings that an institution has. We have then the finding aids, which we differentiate in the actual collections, where we might have collection level descriptions and or item level descriptions. And there might be links to digital objects attached to that. And then we have what we call holdings guides and source guides. Holdings guides are essentially a general description of the collections of one specific institution. And source guides are a general description of collections either of one institution or several institutions tied together by subject. And next to that, we also have some descriptions of records creators. That is something that we look into extending and enhancing in the next 2 years. At the moment, there's only about 1/3 of the countries that are in Archives Portal Europe who are also providing those descriptions. So we're looking into possibilities to enable other countries to also provide that. In terms of what the portal covers and doesn't cover, because that's always a question that our users struggle with. So in terms of countries, if we just look at Europe and how Europe is mostly described in terms of these are the countries belonging to Europe, we are about 3/4 of the way there, so to say. There are still a few countries that are not represented, or others that are only represented by the National Archive. Types of institutions, it very much depends on the specific type. So the university archives are relatively big in terms of their representation, but there also are other types of archival institutions like business archives or private archives that we could certainly have more of. And in terms of the content, just because that also is a big difference between us and Europeana, if that is known to anyone. So we are focusing on metadata, and if there are links to digital objects, we will include them, but it's not a requirement in order to take part in Archives Portal Europe. So that's why we have the kind of full extension on metadata, and in terms of digital objects, it's currently more digitized objects than it's digital born. We have a few digital born examples in our content at the moment, but it's really kind of a few examples here and there, and not anything more specific. As this relates to how people can currently use topic-based searches in Archives Portal Europe, I wanted to give you a brief introduction in the inner workings of data preparation. I'm only kind of scratching on the surface, but I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has that in the Q&A session later on. Archives Portal Europe is based on international XML standards at the moment, so we are essentially using a subset of those international standards. In this context, what we mainly will be looking at is the encoded archival description, EAD. And we are not using it in the very newest version, but we are still using the version of 2002. And when I say subset, that means that we have essentially tailored the use of EAD to Archives Portal Europe, so to the functionalities that we want to support, but we also have based it on the actual active use in our partner institutions. So for anyone who knows EAD, you probably are aware that this is a relatively flexible standard. So there are sometimes several ways to do the same thing. And we have decided for one way when our partner institutions definitely don't use the other way, so to say. With this, so with having defined a central application profile on how we use those standards, that means that data delivery almost always also means data conversion in order to be valid against that central application profile. How does the data get to Archives Portal Europe? As I already mentioned, most of it currently comes via national aggregators or national archives administrations. So that is essentially the case in most of the Eastern European countries, where you might have one and the same system being used not only by the national archives, but also by other specifically administrative archives in the country on regional or on local levels. We also still have a few institutions that come to us directly, but that's probably like 5 to 10% of what we currently have. In terms of the conversion that I just mentioned, there are different ways where this can happen. And that also depends mostly on the way how the data gets to Archives Portal Europe. So it can either be converted locally, that means before the upload, with specific export formats from existing archival management systems, and that is the use case of national aggregators, that the national aggregators have created an export format that already matches our requirements to make it easier to get their data in. Alternatively, people can use the local data preparation tool that I mentioned earlier, and then kind of already have their data prepared and in the right format before upload. And the third option is that all of that conversion happens centrally. That means after the upload. So they upload their data in their local format, and then either the default script that is in our dashboard picks up on the data and converts it, or we might have customized data depending on what the situation is. During conversion, there are different options to influence the data, and that also means to a certain extent to add information to the data that is not necessarily included at its source. For example, what we are adding is information around the digital objects. So we are giving the possibility to assign a type to the digital object. So for example, if you have a photograph collections, you could assign the type image to it. If you have kind of a purely textual or documentary collection, you can assign the type text. And you can also assign write statements specifically to the digital objects that we will then kind of use in our display. The other possibility in terms of influencing the data during conversion is connected to the topics. And you can see an example here. And if you kind of just follow me from left to right through this table, you can see that we have essentially defined specific topics centrally. Those are the first two columns that gives you the property of the topic and then a more textual description of what is behind that topic. And then at the fourth column, you can see the subject headings or keywords that are actively already in the data and that our content providers have mapped to the central topics. So essentially they're using subject headings, which probably might be in their own language. So you can see there's a lot of French in there in this example. And they are essentially kind of mapping it to the central topics and saying, anywhere where you find one of these keywords in my metadata, please make sure that this is connected to this central topic. In terms of why we decided to look into topics and to look into possibilities to support topic creation, you need to keep in mind that we are essentially acting within a multilingual and multicultural research space. So as I mentioned, we have information from 30+ countries. That means we have information that is to some extent structured differently based on the description tradition that is imminent in those countries. And we also have a variation of institution types, which also might be reflected in slightly different approaches and how they have described their data. In terms of countries and institutions, there are different points where we can kind of surface that in our display. So for example, we have a possibility to filter search results by country or to filter it by a specific institution. And for each search result, we will always kind of show that connection to institution and to the country to provide some context to the user. We also are interacting with information in more than 20 languages. And that means we've got a multilingual interface and a multilingual search. But we also have multilingual content because we do not translate the content that we get from the partner. So the content and the data will always stay within their original languages. So that means that you might kind of get represented with some search results in several languages, and you might not always be able to understand all of them. So this is why we said maybe having a possibility for topics-based search entry, where we have predefined topics that we centrally create, and where we can provide translations, at least kind of on a very high and general introductory level, will help users to maybe kind of find information that is specific to some topic that they might be interested in their research, and then provides them a slightly different entry point than just a general keyword search, where they might not always know the correct terminology, so to say, or the terminology that has been used in the archival descriptions. This is how this currently looks like. So essentially on our homepage, we already have highlighted the topics-based entry points. And then we have all our topics represented on a separate page. And if you kind of click on one of them, you can see a short introductory text, you can see some images, and then you can essentially kind of start a search specifically on that topic, and you will get back all information that has been mapped to that topic in the back end. So this also means that those topics are one of our search filters. So even if you have done a general search without using the topics, you will always have that option in the search filters and can then kind of maybe enter that information at that point. As I mentioned, this is based on a selective and curated list of currently around 80 topics. We have used the UNESCO Thesaurus and the UK Archival Thesaurus as a basis for that. because we wanted to have an English language version as kind of our starting point, with the possibility to already kind of have links to other language versions, which we cover with the UNESCO thesaurus. We have essentially translated the topic labels by our network partners, so thereby we can offer a variety of languages according to the language of the user interface of the portal. So if you're looking at the user interface in English, you will see other topic labels than if you would be looking at it in French. There are two ways how our partners can connect to the topics, and one I already showed you earlier in terms of the kind of tweaks that providers can do when doing the data preparation. So essentially picking up on existing subject headings, which means this possibility requires subject headings to already be in the metadata, but it also provides you a broad variety of topics and subject headings that you can match, and you can do that on the collection level. If you only have that information on collection level, you could also do it on the item level. So with the mapping, you can essentially kind of capture all possibilities that you might find in your collections. The alternative to that goes back to one of the types of finding aids that we are supporting in Archives Portal Europe, the source guide, where I said that this is kind of a general overview of collections that are bound by a specific theme or topic or subject. This does not require subject headings to be in the metadata, but it essentially requires you to have a source guide available, or to create one specifically in order to make this topic mapping. So both of these options, as you will have probably gathered, require manual work, and there are also different other challenges with this. So not all archival descriptions include subject headings. This is also something that is very different from one country to the other, whether that is kind of a usual thing to do in the archival descriptions. There also will be differences in terms of having subject headings only on collection level, or only on item level, or on both. With the other option, not all countries are used to using source guides. And as I mentioned, so all of this requires manual work from our content providers. And at the moment, that results in a rather inconsistent coverage of the topics. So at the moment, you will mainly find material in French and in German mapped to the topics. Specifically, the French colleagues have been very active and have mapped 60 out of the 80 topics with their material, and then Germany has mapped to 7 topics, and then we've got a few other countries who have kind of selected topics, 1 or 2 maybe. So this brought us to the point where we thought, okay, we need to find other ways, additional ways, how we can kind of support this topic-based searches. And one thing that we have currently introduced with a new design that we only launched last week is a possibility for crowdsourced topic mapping. So we have this possibility for users now to make a suggestion when they are working in Archives Portal Europe and looking at specific search results. And one of those possibilities is to assign a search result to a topic. So they can select this option, they can provide some additional information about why they think that a specific document is relevant for a certain topic. At the moment, all of that ends up in our central inbox. So we haven't yet kind of decided on the way of how we will surface that, if that is something that will only happen within the central website, or if that is something that we would also kind of give back to our content providers for them to see if they wanted to kind of officially include that in their metadata, so to say. So that's the one thing. The other thing is that we started looking into the possibilities of doing a more automated process in terms of assigning the topics or finding the topics. And what we started out doing is essentially a pilot project in automated topic detection. And we have a little tool developed which currently can do two things. So we have a part one, which is called Cross-Lingual Search in Archives Portal Europe. You have the link to that as well as to the part two in the collaborative notes document. And I'm just going to talk you through what these two parts do and what it is that you will see when you look at the tool. So the part one, the objective for it was to be able to identify material that already is in Archives Portal Europe and that is related to a specific topic, but where we do not have the tagging in the metadata. So essentially, we are looking at a possibility to detect a relation to a specific concept or entity with not requiring subject headings to be available in the metadata already, but essentially picking up on descriptive information, for example, the title or the content summary that is part of the metadata description. So we would see that as kind of an extension to the current keyword search in the portal. And we would see it for something that our users can use, but also our content providers could use. We currently are in the kind of beta phase for this. So this is not yet covering all the content that we have in Archives Portal Europe, but we essentially have included a test sample of a little bit more than 600,000 documents in there, which are currently connected to 12 topics. So this is data that already kind of is assigned to a specific topic by our content providers, which means that it might be general. So if you try it out later on and then do some searches.
Is there any food? Sorry.
Then you might, depending on your search term, might kind of also get situations where you won't find any results just because it's not covered in the test sample set that is currently in this part of the tool. This also means that the content is predominantly in French and German, with some documents being in Finnish, Latvian, and Polish. So these are essentially the documents that already have been connected to the topics that are covered here. And we are also covering additional languages for searching. So that also includes English, Hebrew, Italian, Russian, Slovenian, Spanish, and Swedish. There are two ways of searching with the tool, and they are kind of functioning slightly differently. So one thing is what we call concept search. So that's more kind of general themes, topics, rather than specific entities like persons or places or organizations. And what we are using in terms of the method is something that is called fast text word embeddings. What that means is that we are essentially trying to capture the meaning of the document or of the document's content. And we have pre-trained that on Wikipedia and aligned this in what is called a common cross-lingual semantic space. So allowing us to make connections between different languages, but also make semantic connections within the same language. And we are reusing something that was initially developed in the project Musso. The slide deck includes the link to that. So that was originally from the Facebook context, but essentially provided us a good basis in terms of multilingual contexts. So as I mentioned, so we are trying to represent the document's content as essentially a mathematical value. And we are also doing this with the user query, which means at the end, we have two mathematical values that we can compare. And that allows us to see how close the query is to what we would say is a representation of the meaning of a document. So that allows us to kind of come up with a value that indicates how close we think something is to a specific topic. In terms of the entity search, this is essentially creating a mapping between the entity searched for, so the name of a person or a place or an organization, with its equivalent, if present, in Wikidata and in the Virtual International Authority file. With these two, we are also retrieving name variations in other languages. So not only necessarily in the languages that we have covered with the tool. And that also means that we are able to kind of retrieve any kind of those name variations if they are present in the content and show them. The second part of the tool is what we call multilingual detection. And that is essentially the possibility for you to enter text, so to enter part of your metadata and your description, and to get that analyzed. So the question of identifying concepts and entities within the metadata for new material. So that would be something that we would see as something new. At the moment, it simply works with putting the text in the field via copy and paste. A future extension that we are looking at is the possibility to upload the metadata to be analyzed, and also to see if we can integrate that somehow in the workflows of Archives Portal Europe. So this would be something that we see more in use for the content providers rather than the users directly. How this works, it's essentially checking the given text for concepts and entities present in Wikidata, and it will resurface that, and you can then kind of check whether you think the found concepts and entities are correct. And this would be kind of a starting point for you to consider including those as subject headings in the metadata so that they can further be used in other contexts. This is currently supporting 4 different input languages. So that's something that we are looking to extend. And the text will be understood as being in the selected language completely. So one thing that we found in early tests is that if you have a description in mainly one language and then part of that description is, for example, in another language, there might be some inconsistency in the detected concepts and entities, which is mainly to do with the internal ranking that Wikidata, respectively Wikipedia, applies, which might be different depending on the language and the national context, so to say. How does the tool look like? And this is essentially the last part of my presentation, and then I'll open the floor for any questions before we go into the testing part. So the part 1, the cross-lingual search on Archives Portal Europe, has a search field where you can include your keywords, either consisting of one term or several terms. The default will be searching by all the terms that you have input. So if you are searching for something that actually makes up a term out of several words, you should use the quotation marks to indicate that. You can also use the wildcard, the asterisks, and you can use Boolean operators and, or, and not. You can specify the language that your keyword is in. You can distinguish whether you're searching for a concept, so something more general and kind of using the semantic relations, or if you're using specifically for an entity. And you can specify how many results you want to be displayed. The standard is 10, although specifically in concept searches, I'd recommend using a higher number, because that will kind of also then give you more possibilities to see and evaluate. There are 2 specific points at the bottom with the check marks. So if you're using Boolean operators, you will have to check the box Boolean search. Otherwise, the tool will just understand the and, or, and not as another part of your search term. And there is something that we have called broad entity mention search. And that is the relation to Wikidata and VIAF, and will include all languages of the name for an entity that are available there. So not only the language of your search term and not only the languages represented in the tool. When you run a search, there are a few things to think about and to consider. So the first thing is that it might take a while, especially if you're doing entity searches, because we are currently running them on the fly. So it also will depend on your connection in terms of the internet and how stable that is, how long it will take. And there are also still a few constraints with regard to the tool itself being only a beta version at the moment. As mentioned, you will usually get the amount of results that you have specified, but specifically in entity searches, you might also get less. So if you have specified 100, it might also be that you only get 20 results when doing an entity search, because the entity search is more specific. And we'll only return matches if we have found them accordingly. You should remember that the dataset is constrained to specific topics. I have listed them here. As said, you will find the slide deck also in the collaborative notes document. So hopefully that will give you an indication. You can see there are some rather broad and some more constrained topics in there. So as I mentioned at the beginning, you can try any term that you want, but some might just not be found in the data set as it currently stands. And the other thing to remember is that the data set mainly consists of document in French and German. So I recommend having Google Translate open next to the tool if you want to evaluate whether the results actually fit your search or not. So, this is how the results will be represented. And just to show you the variation of languages and scripts, I've used the term Glasgow in Cyrillic. And you can see that we're getting results also in other languages than Cyrillic at the bottom. There are just a few things with regards to what you can see for the results. So you see the file name, which is essentially the name of the document. You can see the topic. So that's the topic that this document is currently linked to as it stands in Archive Europe. The content is the description field of the document, which can get quite long depending on how much input our colleagues have created there. The country is the country of origin and mostly is equivalent with the language. Period is the dates of creation of the document, and then the score is the tool's evaluation of how close the example is to your search term. What you also will see is that within the content part, the words that we have found to be a match to your keyword are highlighted in variations of blue. The darker the blue, the stronger the semantic relation. And then if you're searching for entities, you will also see the links to Wikipedia and or VIAF at the top. So you can essentially kind of check those two vocabularies and see to which entity we have matched. Specifically in entity searches, it might also be at some point that we have maybe for whatever reason found the wrong entity. So it's always good to check that. In terms of the second part, that interface is slightly easier. So you've got a text field where you can input the copy of your metadata. So for example, the description or the title or other more descriptive fields and elements. And then the main thing that you have to do is to specify the language that your metadata is in. And what the tool will do is that it will analyze your metadata. So essentially also, again, the note that this might take a while, because again, we will be checking against Wikidata on the fly. This is an example how the results might look like. So you've got the content that you've input, the content that you input on the left-hand side, and then on the right you have the entities that the tool has found. You can see that all of them are linked, so you can click on them again and you can check whether the entity is actually the correct one in your context. And with the entities and next to the link, you will also see the start and end character. So that gives you the position of where this entity has been found in the text provided. An indication of type of entity, so whether that entity is an organization, a person, a place, or something similar. And you will have a confidence score with regard again to how certain the tool is that it has identified the correct concept of an entity. And that's the point where I'm going to stop presenting. And that would be the point first for questions, and then for you to try out the tool, either both parts or just one part, depending on which one you are specifically interested in. But I'll stop sharing so that I can actually see you, and I'll see if there are any questions.
Great, thanks so much for that, Kerstin. That was very clear, and well done for working through all those distractions. I think your dog really wants to be a part of iPres, doesn't he?
Yeah, definitely.
They've always got such great timing. So what you're describing here looks like a really great solution to a very real challenge that I think a lot of people will experience around multilingual searching. So thanks for sharing that with us today. We haven't got any questions in the chat as yet that I can see. But if anyone has a question or a comment, do feel free to pop it in the chat, or we've got one now, or also you're very free to unmute your microphone. Quite nice small group here if people wanted to speak up as well.
Yeah.
So, Fabi, let's see what you've got to say. So Fabiana says, thanks for sharing. Have you encountered a situation where an entity you search is not available in Wikidata or VIAF, and are you striving to contribute to Wikidata?
Yeah, so we have indeed encountered those situations. Sometimes it's also that the only link that we are getting from Wikidata is one of those kind of disambiguation pages, so where you have essentially kind of several entries and entities in Wikidata, and Wikidata just kind of doesn't want to point you to a specific one, but gives you, okay, this term could be this, this, and this. We haven't yet necessarily thought about actively contributing to Wikidata, but that could, of course, be an option once we go kind of in production, so to say, with this tool. Yeah.
Great question. Thanks, Fabi. Does anyone else have a question? Does anyone want to speak up? I'm also looking at room 3. So room 3 is a room of conference where I know we're being broadcast. I don't know if there's anyone sitting in there at the moment, but I believe you can maybe come to the front and unmute and speak, or type into the chat as well if you would like to. No. It's all quiet. So what's your plan next, Kerstin? Are we moving into a session where we're going to have a go with the search or the tools ourselves?
Yes, yeah. So maybe I can just kind of put the links again into the chat so that everyone has them there as well.
Great. And there is a collaborative notes document as well, are they? Is that right?
Yeah, they are there as well, so you can also pick them up there.
I mean, if you wanted to take a couple of minutes to do something with your pup, yep. I don't know if that would help. If you know, you could give him a chew or something to settle him down, then do feel free just to take a little break, and we'll wait, and you can come back. It's entirely up to you, Kerstin.
Yeah, so I've put the links in the chat. So for anyone who wants to have a go, please feel free to do so. I would say, as we're already kind of a little bit further down the time than initially intended, we should probably kind of give ourselves 20 minutes, so until past, and then we still got 15 minutes for any general questions. In terms of our Kiko's question in the chat just now, so essentially we had one colleague external collaborating with us on this project, and then our own developer also helping a little bit with kind of front-end development.
Oh yes, well spotted. I didn't see that in the chat. Thanks, Akiko.
Okay. So yeah, so please feel free to test the tool, to try it a little bit, and then yeah, not very many. It's all kind of very small as we operate at the moment. And if anyone has any questions in between, I'm happy to answer them, and otherwise, past we'll have a general Q&A session.
Okay.
And I'll have a look if I can find something to calm my dog down in the meantime.
I feel your pain. It's a real challenge when they're young and they want attention.
Yeah.
And you're in the middle of a presentation. It's tough, but you coped admirably. So we're going to click on that link, and we're just going to have a go and have a look. Is that right? And
yes.
We're going to just work quietly. We can feel free to post things in the chat as we go along. Yep. And you'll be around and about, and we'll come back to chat at past. Okay,
yeah, perfect.
Is everybody happy?
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Kerstin, for answering that question in the chat.
Sure, no problem.
So it's now a good time to come back and see if anyone else has any questions.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, we are at past, so maybe if we can kind of come back together, those that are still here, and see if anyone has any questions, any impressions in terms of the tool. The links are publicly available, both of them, so you can also kind of continue playing around with the tool if you want to later on, and yeah, provide any feedback via the feedback form that are also linked in the collaborative notes document, because I'm aware that 20 minutes is not much time to kind of have a go at the tool as it stands.
So if anyone has a question, feel free to pop it in the chat, or if you want to unmute your microphone, that's fine too. I was just going to ask a question, Kerstin, about how other people can do similar things. So I know you've got the tools available on GitHub, which is great. And I was wondering if you thought those tools could be easily translated to another context. Are they quite easy to pick up and use by someone else, or is it going to take quite a bit of work to do that, do you think?
So they should be relatively easy to pick up. The only thing is that kind of the first part, so the cross-lingual search, that requires you to have the data that you want to kind of put in the tool in JSON format. So that's the format that we are currently using in the back end. So as long as you can either kind of convert your data into that, or kind of have your data already in JSON, then it should be relatively easy to pick up on this. The kind of language framework that we're using does not support all languages, so that might also be something that you would need to have a look at in terms of your context, whether the languages that you want to support are already in there. We are working on some documentation in terms of how you can add another language if you wanted to. Yeah.
Great, thanks. And do you know if people have picked up those tools and started using them, or is it too early?
It's probably too early. Yeah, it's probably too early to actually say something about this. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's great. You've made them available. So thank you for doing that. So we've got a question in the chat from Halisa. Saying, have you encountered concepts which are also entities? And if so, how do you differentiate between them for relevance? Or entities belonging to more than one class, e.g. a place as well as an organization?
Yeah. So with regard to the first question, so the line is a little bit blurry, I have to admit, specifically when you look at the type of entries, to kind of use a general term, that Wikidata has, where you might also find something like First World War being treated as kind of an entity, an object in Wikidata, which we would more generally see as kind of a theme or topic or concept, because it's not something very specific yet that you can kind of put your hand on, so to say. So when you use the entity, or when you're searching for something that conceptually is more like a concept, you might use the concept search as well as the entity search and might get results in both of them. So that's a little bit blurry in terms of that definition. Entities belonging to more than one class. I don't think we necessarily had an example of that yet, but if you have an example for that, and you were wondering in terms of what the feedback is, please feel free to let me know, or to put that in the feedback form, and then we can kind of investigate, because I think it's an interesting case, and there probably are quite a few examples around there. It might again also be something where kind of the ranking of Wikidata itself could play a part. As I mentioned earlier, so one example that we came across in the testing, maybe just to kind of visualize that, is we had a text that we used, which was about a performance of the play Coriolanus from Shakespeare. And in the English context, that worked quite well. So essentially kind of the referenced entity was the play, Coriolanus, while in the German context, the ranking is different. And so the Wikidata page that we picked up on was the historical figure, Coriolanus. So that also might depend a little bit on the vocabularies that you're using. And that's also something that we want to look into in terms of connecting to other vocabularies than just the two that we currently have.
Great question, thank you, Halisa. I was just going to ask how long your feedback form's open for, how long you want people to carry on engaging with this.
So definitely for another 4 weeks, so kind of a month after this is kind of the usual timeline that we would have them open, as we have them kind of specific to certain contexts, but yeah. Great,
that's good to know. And then I was going to ask how the puppy is. Sleeping peacefully?
He's safe, and he's having a go at a pig's ear now, so
oh, good.
He should be occupied for a little bit.
Brilliant, well done. So does anyone else have any other questions for Kerstin, or did you have anything else, Kerstin, you wanted to say?
Yeah, maybe just kind of a few things in terms of what we are thinking about doing with the tool. So I already mentioned that we are looking into extending with other vocabularies, so also kind of maybe including a specific vocabulary on places as one specific type of entity. So looking into geonames, something like that. We are also, of course, thinking about how we can expand the tool's capacity to actually cover the whole content that Archives Portal Europe currently holds, not just this smaller data set. And then I think once we have done that step, the next step would then be to look into actually integrating it into the other tools and services that we currently have, because at the moment it's a separate thing. But for example, kind of trying to surface this semantic search for the users of the portal or to integrate the other part into the data preparation workflows would be one of the next steps to look at.
Great. Fabi's got her hand up. Hiya.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can.
Fantastic. Kerstin, thank you so much for the presentation. We're doing I'm doing some tests and on our own database on based LSC library using VIAF and weak data. And that's why I was interested to see, because some of our content, so we're doing authority database, basically constructing our authority database, and topics is our next one. So I was really looking forward to hear you. But my reason to open up the mic and see, I've played with the tool, and when you open up to the public, I'm just trying to get a sense how the tool can be used. Do we have to contribute to the main portal in order to use the tool, or is it going to be, as you say, separate? So in my case, let's say I don't really use the tool, the portal so much, but I would like to use the tool. How could I do that? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think I understood what you're getting at. So there probably will be kind of two ways. So at the moment, as I mentioned in the general overview, we have the tools centrally as well as locally available, and the local version of the tool you can, in theory, use completely independent from Archives Portal Europe. So you could also use that kind of in your own context without any connections. There are possibilities to kind of include your own metadata schemas for validation and all of that. And I would foresee that this tool that I presented today will probably go down a similar route, so that we will have one version that is integrated in our central systems and that is free to use for anyone with the data that Archives Portal Europe has at that point of time, but then also having it integrated in the local version so that anyone who wanted to use it in a different context could also do that.
So you're also making the code available in GitHub, aren't you? So
yeah,
we could even think of integrate with other parts of our workflow.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great, thanks for that. We've probably got time for one more question if anyone's got one. Perhaps not.
Otherwise, so same as the feedback form. So you also got my email address in the slide deck. So feel free to drop me a line if you have any other follow-up questions that are not necessarily related to the tool specifically. Happy to kind of keep in contact.
That's great. Thanks, Kerstin. Okay, so that's been really interesting. It's been a great tutorial. Thanks, Kerstin, and thanks to you all for coming along and participating. And perhaps we should give Kerstin a round of applause if we can find the right reaction button. I'm just failing to do that, but here you go, have a real one.
Thanks very much.
Great.